Ever sit down, fully intending to start that one thing, the project, the dream, the decision, and find yourself doing absolutely nothing? Not because you don't want it, not because you're lazy, but because something deep inside you just won't move? You scroll, you sigh, you self-blame, and somewhere between guilt and exhaustion, you begin to wonder if you're just broken. Pause here. Did a part of you just whisper, "This is me"? You're not broken. You're carrying something. And that something has a name: the shadow of motivation loss. What if I told you that your inability to begin isn't a character flaw? It's your psyche protecting you from something you can't even see. What if the very thing you call laziness is actually your soul's way of saying, "Not until you hear me"? I know what that paralysis feels like. There was a time I had plans, goals, even passion. And then I met my own shadow, the part of me I thought I had outgrown. But it came back, and with it, all my drive vanished. In this video, we'll explore why that happens through the lens of Carl Jung Shadow work. We'll uncover the hidden emotional wounds that quietly steal your energy. And more importantly, we'll learn how to reclaim the spark that once lit you up. If you've been stuck in that strange place between wanting and not doing, if you've ever felt like you're fighting an invisible force every time you try to move forward, this is for you. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Today, we're making the unconscious conscious. You've felt it, haven't you? That moment when you sit down to work and suddenly feel heavy, like you're moving through water, like something unseen is holding you back. Most people call this laziness. I call it wisdom. The wisdom of a part of you that learned, somewhere along the way, that moving forward meant moving toward pain. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Most of what we call laziness is actually resistance. Resistance rooted in pain, shame, or unresolved memory. You can't begin something if your unconscious mind believes doing this will make me unsafe again. Think about Sarah, a 29-year-old graphic designer who dreamed of starting her own creative studio. Every time she opened her laptop to work on her business plan, she'd find herself cleaning her apartment instead. Hours would pass. Nothing would get done. She called herself lazy, unmotivated, a failure. But here's what Sarah didn't know. When she was 12, her mother would scrutinize every art project she brought home, finding flaws, suggesting improvements, until Sarah learned that creating meant being criticized. Her unconscious mind remembered. Every time she tried to create something new, something entirely her own, that 12-year-old whispered, "They'll just tear it apart anyway." If this feels uncomfortably familiar, it means you're ready. Don't turn away. That voice saying, "Why bother?" That blank stare at the screen? They're not failures of discipline. They're echoes of moments when trying cost you too much. Times when being seen meant being judged. When starting something new meant risking disappointment. When success meant someone else would feel small. These fragments became your shadow, the repository of everything you learned to hide, diminish, or deny about yourself in order to be loved, accepted, safe. Jung called the shadow the thing a person has no wish to be. But what if the thing you have no wish to be is actually the thing you need most? What if your procrastination is pointing toward the exact place where your authentic self got buried? Your body remembers, even if your mind forgets. Shadow work doesn't just stir memories. It activates protection mechanisms. You're not unmotivated. You're guarded. And the gatekeeper is an old version of you who still believes safety means silence, stillness, or disappearing. When you try to push through this resistance with force, with discipline, with just do it mentality, you're essentially telling that frightened part of you to shut up and move. But shadows don't respond to force. They respond to recognition. You've carried this long enough. Let yourself be still for once. Consider Marcus, a 31-year-old who couldn't finish anything he started. Every creative project, every business idea, every relationship, they all began with enthusiasm and ended with mysterious exhaustion. He thought he had commitment issues. Really, he had a shadow that learned commitment meant disappointment. His father had left when Marcus was 7, right after promising they'd build a treehouse together. His unconscious mind made a connection. Starting something means someone leaves. So every time Marcus got close to completing something meaningful, his nervous system would flood with the same abandonment panic he felt at 7, and he'd find a way to sabotage it first. What happens when the person you became in order to survive starts suffocating the person you're meant to be? You were born with a natural creative force. Jung called it the transcendent function, the part of you that naturally seeks growth, expression, connection. But somewhere along the way, you learned that this force was dangerous. Too much, too wild, too authentic for the world you were born into. So you built a persona, a mask that made you lovable, acceptable, safe. And somewhere in that building, you buried parts of yourself so deep you forgot they existed. Now, when you try to create, to start, to become, those buried parts stir. And that stirring feels like paralysis because you've forgotten how to be authentically you. When you begin healing, your soul says, "Wait, do I finally get to rest?" And suddenly, the fire is gone. You confuse peace with emptiness and silence with failure. But here's the truth. You're not regressing. You're integrating. You're no longer chasing motivation through trauma. You're learning to live without punishment. Jung said, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. Facing your shadow is not supposed to make you hyperproductive. It's supposed to make you whole. Think about Emma, a 33-year-old who had built her entire identity around being the productive one. She was the friend who always had it together, the employee who never missed a deadline, the daughter who never caused problems. But when she started therapy and began uncovering her shadow, the parts of her that felt angry, messy, uncertain, her productivity plummeted. For 3 months, she could barely answer emails. She'd sit in her car after work, too exhausted to go inside. She thought she was breaking down. Really, she was breaking through years of using productivity as a drug to numb the pain of not feeling inherently worthy of love. Her motivation hadn't died. It had been hijacked by survival, and now it was finally being returned to its rightful owner, her authentic self. What if the thing you can't start is the exact thing your shadow is protecting? What if your procrastination isn't keeping you from your dreams? It's keeping you from your fears. Take a moment. What would you start tomorrow if you knew you were already enough? The shadow often contains not just our pain, but our power, the very qualities we learn to suppress. Our wildness, our sensitivity, our authenticity are often the exact qualities we need to create the life we want. But the shadow doesn't just give these back. It makes you earn them. It makes you prove that you can hold both your light and your darkness, your success and your humanity, your dreams and your wounds. This is why motivation feels so elusive. You're not just trying to start a project. You're trying to reclaim parts of yourself you learned to abandon. What if your lack of motivation isn't a problem to solve, but an invitation to receive? What if that blank feeling isn't depression, but spaciousness? What if your inability to push forward is actually your psyche's way of saying, before we move, we need to feel what we've been carrying? Jung called this the transcendent function, the psychological process where conscious and unconscious unite to create something new. But this process requires a kind of emptiness first, a willingness to not know, to not do, to not be anyone for a moment. Most of us are terrified of this emptiness because we've learned that our worth is tied to our output. We've learned that love is earned through achievement, that safety comes through control, that value is measured in productivity. But what if that's all wrong? What if worthiness isn't something you earn? What if it's something you remember? The emptiness you're feeling isn't a void to be filled. It's a space to be honored. It's your soul creating room for something new to emerge. It's the pause between breaths, the silence between notes, the darkness before dawn. In many wisdom traditions, this emptiness is considered sacred. In Zen Buddhism, it's called beginner's mind, the openness that allows for genuine learning. In mystical Christianity, it's the dark night of the soul, the necessary dissolution that precedes spiritual rebirth. In psychology, it's the fallow period that follows trauma, the time when the psyche reorganizes itself around new possibilities. But in our culture, emptiness is treated like a disease, something to be cured, filled, fixed as quickly as possible. We're told to stay busy, stay distracted, stay productive. We're told that not knowing what we want is a character flaw, that not feeling motivated is a personal failure. What if that's backwards? What if the ability to sit with emptiness, to rest in uncertainty, to be present with not knowing? What if that's actually a sign of psychological maturity? Beneath your resistance, beneath your procrastination, beneath your confusion about what you want and why you can't seem to get it, there's an underground river of authentic desire. It's been flowing this whole time, even when you couldn't hear it, even when you thought it had dried up completely. This river doesn't flow according to your timeline. It doesn't care about your deadlines or your 5-year plan or what other people expect from you. It flows according to its own rhythm, its own seasons, its own mysterious logic. Sometimes it goes underground for months, even years. Sometimes it emerges in the most unexpected places. Sometimes what you think you want turns out to be a pale shadow of what you actually need. Your job isn't to control this river. Your job is to learn how to listen to it, to trust it, to follow it even when it leads you through terrain you don't recognize, even when it asks you to leave behind maps you thought you needed. What is the thing you've been avoiding because it feels too big, too scary, too impossible? What if that's exactly where your river is trying to take you? The path back to authentic motivation isn't about pushing harder. It isn't about finding the right productivity system or the perfect morning routine or the most inspiring vision board. It's about creating enough inner safety that action feels natural again. It's about befriending the parts of yourself you've been at war with for so long that you've forgotten what peace feels like. Don't rush the emptiness. Don't try to fill the silence with noise, the stillness with movement, the not knowing with premature answers. It's not a void, it's a recalibration. What you're feeling is your system resetting, your psyche reorganizing itself around new possibilities, your soul remembering what it actually wants underneath all the things you thought you were supposed to want. Trust that. Trust the pause. Trust the emptiness. Trust the not knowing. Your motivation didn't break. It didn't disappear. It didn't abandon you. It's been hijacked by old programming that says you have to earn the right to exist through constant doing, constant achieving, constant proving that you deserve to take up space in this world. Now it's returning to its natural state, a gentle, organic impulse that arises from self-love, not self-punishment. This return doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, gradually, like a flower opening in the early morning light. You have to create the conditions for it. You have to tend the soil. You have to be patient with the process. What part of yourself have you silenced just to feel loved? Let me tell you about David, a 30-year-old software engineer who couldn't understand why he'd lost all passion for coding. The thing that used to bring him alive. The thing that had gotten him through a difficult childhood. The thing that had always been his refuge from a world that often felt too harsh and too loud. He'd sit at his computer, staring at lines of code that used to excite him, and feel nothing. Worse than nothing. He'd feel heavy, like he was forcing himself through mud. Every line of code felt meaningless. Every project felt pointless. Every day at work felt like a slow death. He thought he was burning out. He thought he needed a vacation, a new job, a complete career change. He Googled quarter-life crisis and job burnout and how to find your passion again. He considered going back to school, traveling the world, starting a food truck. But through shadow work, David discovered that his passion for coding had originally been his escape from a chaotic childhood. Programming was the one place he felt in control, competent, valuable. It was the one place where his perfectionism was rewarded, where his attention to detail was seen as a gift rather than a burden, where his introversion was an asset rather than a liability. But somewhere along the way, what had been a joy became a prison. He was coding not from creativity, but from the terror of being useless, worthless, expendable. He was coding not because he loved solving problems, but because he was terrified of becoming a problem himself. The breakthrough came when David allowed himself to not code for 2 weeks. to just be, to feel the anxiety of not producing, the terror of not being useful, the deep fear that he might be fundamentally lazy, fundamentally broken, fundamentally wrong. And in that sitting, in that willingness to be with the discomfort instead of escaping into work, something shifted. The pressure lifted, the weight disappeared, and slowly, like a spring emerging after a long winter, curiosity returned. Not the desperate, driving curiosity of someone trying to prove their worth. The gentle, natural curiosity of someone who genuinely wanted to understand how things worked, who found joy in elegant solutions and beautiful code. His motivation had come home. When you're ready, and only when you're ready. Only when it feels like a gentle invitation rather than another item on your self-improvement to-do list. These practices can help you reconnect with your authentic motivation. Journal your resistance instead of shaming it. Sit down with a pen and paper and write. Part of me doesn't want to start because, and let whatever comes up flow onto the page. Don't edit. Don't judge. Don't try to make it pretty or profound or publishable. Just listen. Let your resistance speak. Let it tell you its story. Let it explain what it's been trying to protect. You might be surprised by what emerges. You might discover that your resistance isn't irrational at all. It's incredibly wise, incredibly protective, incredibly attuned to dangers you hadn't even consciously recognized. Move your body, not to burn calories or build muscle or achieve any particular outcome, but to return to yourself. Take a walk without your phone, without music, without podcasts, just you and your feet and the ground beneath you. Dance in your living room to music that makes you feel alive. Stretch on your floor, not because you should, but because it feels good to inhabit your body fully. Let your body remind you what it feels like to move for pleasure, not performance. To exist in physical form without having to justify that existence through productivity or achievement. Speak to your shadow like a scared child, not a monster. When you feel that familiar paralysis, that heavy weight, that mysterious resistance, try saying, I know you're trying to protect me. What are you afraid will happen if I start this? What do you need to feel safe? And then listen, really listen. Don't try to argue with the answers or convince your shadow that its fears are irrational. Just acknowledge them. Thank them. Let them know they've been heard. Small actions done with presence reignite motivation from the inside, not pressure from the outside. Make your bed not because you should, but because you deserve to live in beauty. Write one sentence not because you have to, but because you have something to say. Wash one dish not because your kitchen should be clean, but because you want to take care of the space where you nourish yourself. Notice how different these actions feel when they come from love rather than obligation, from self-care rather than self-improvement. Here's where our productivity-obsessed culture gets wrong. Motivation isn't something you generate through willpower. It isn't something you can force or fake or manufacture through the right combination of goals and deadlines and accountability partners. Motivation is a byproduct. It's what emerges naturally when you feel safe enough to want things, when you trust yourself enough to begin, when you love yourself enough to risk failure, when you're connected enough to your authentic self to know what actually matters to you. The real path forward isn't how do I force myself to act? It's how do I create enough emotional safety that action feels natural again? This means learning to start before you feel ready, but only after you feel resourced. Allow your work to be imperfect, but not allow your work to be punishment. Move toward your goals while honoring your humanity. Create from fullness, not emptiness. Trust your timing, even when it doesn't match anyone else's expectations. If you're feeling that familiar resistance, even now, as you listen to this, pause. Breathe. Notice what's happening in your body. You don't have to fix yourself to be worthy of love. You don't have to overcome your resistance to deserve compassion. True motivation, the kind that sustains, that creates, that heals, that builds lives worth living, doesn't come from forcing. It comes from aligning. It arises naturally when you stop trying to be who you think you should be and start being who you actually are. This doesn't mean you never feel resistance. It means you've learned to work with resistance instead of against it. You've learned to hear what it's trying to tell you. You've learned that sometimes the most productive thing you can do is nothing. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is rest. Sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is trust your own timing. Consider Lisa, a 28-year-old artist who spent years forcing herself to paint because she thought she should want to be a professional artist. Every brushstroke felt heavy. Every color choice felt wrong. Every piece felt fake, forced, like she was trying to paint someone else's vision with her own hands. She thought she'd lost her talent. She thought she was a fraud. She thought maybe art just wasn't for her after all. Really, she'd lost her connection to why she started painting in the first place. Because colors made her feel alive. Because there was something in her that needed to be expressed through movement and texture and light. Because painting was her way of translating the beauty she saw in the world into something tangible. Something others could experience. When she gave herself permission to stop pursuing art as a career, when she released herself from the pressure to monetize her creativity, to turn her passion into a business plan, to prove her worth through gallery shows and Instagram followers, something shifted. She started painting again, not for anyone else, not for any particular outcome, just for the joy of it, just because she had something to say and paint was her language. And in that freedom, in that return to her original love affair with color and form, her authentic style emerged. The motivation returned. The fire reignited. But this time it came from love, not should. This time, it came from fullness, not emptiness. This time, it came from her soul, not her fears. There's a kind of selfishness that our culture condemns, but our souls require. The selfishness of honoring your own needs, your own timing, your own truth. The selfishness of saying no to opportunities that don't align with your values. The selfishness of protecting your energy, your creativity, your peace of mind. This isn't the selfishness of narcissism or entitlement. This is the sacred selfishness of self-preservation, of staying connected to who you are underneath all the roles you play and expectations you carry. When you learn to be sacredly selfish, when you learn to choose yourself, to trust yourself, to honor yourself, something beautiful happens. You stop needing external validation to feel worthy. You stop needing constant achievement to feel valuable. You stop needing other people's approval to feel safe. And in that inner security, motivation returns. Not the desperate, grasping motivation of someone trying to prove their worth. The steady, sustainable motivation of someone who knows their worth and wants to express it in the world. You don't need to push harder. You need to listen deeper. You're not lost. You're in between. Between who you were when you survived and who you're becoming as you heal. This isn't the end of your motivation. It's the beginning of a more honest version of it. One not born from fear, but from alignment. One that includes your humanity instead of demanding you transcend it. What you're experiencing isn't failure. It's integration. All those parts of yourself you learn to hide, deny, or overcome, they're asking to be included in your life, not eliminated from it. Your sensitivity isn't weakness, it's information. Your resistance isn't laziness, it's wisdom. Your need for rest isn't self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. When you include these parts instead of fighting them, something magical happens. Energy returns. Not the manic, unsustainable energy of survival, but the steady, renewable energy of authenticity. Moving forward, your relationship with motivation will be different. Instead of waiting for motivation to strike like lightning, you'll learn to cultivate the conditions where it can naturally arise. Safety, presence, self-compassion, connection to meaning, permission to be human. You'll learn that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is begin before you feel ready. And sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is rest before you feel empty. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do is work. And sometimes the most productive thing you can do is nothing. You'll learn to trust your own rhythm, your own seasons, your own timing. You'll learn that creativity isn't a machine that produces on demand, but a garden that grows according to its own mysterious schedule. You'll learn that your worth isn't tied to your output. Your value isn't measured by your productivity. Your right to exist isn't contingent on your achievements. Most importantly, you'll learn that the goal isn't to be motivated all the time. The goal is to be authentic all the time. And sometimes authenticity looks like passionate action. Sometimes it looks like patient waiting. Sometimes it looks like joyful creation. Sometimes it looks like necessary rest. So next time you can't get started, pause. Ask yourself, what part of me is still afraid to begin? And maybe, just maybe, that's the part that needs your love the most. What if your procrastination isn't the enemy of your dreams, but the guardian of your authentic self? What if it's been waiting all this time for you to ask not, how do I fix this, but what are you trying to tell me? What if the thing you've been calling a problem is actually a solution? Your psyche's brilliant way of protecting you from a life that looks successful on the outside, but feels empty on the inside. Write a letter to the part of you that hesitates. Ask it what it needs to feel safe enough to begin. Ask it what it's been trying to protect. Ask it what it wants you to know. You came here thinking you needed to find your motivation, but what you found is something more valuable. Permission to be human while you heal. Permission to start from where you are. Permission to include your shadows in your light. Permission to trust your own timing, even when it doesn't match anyone else's expectations. Your motivation isn't missing. It isn't broken. It isn't lost forever. It's buried under years of believing you had to earn the right to exist, under layers of conditioning that taught you your worth was tied to your productivity, under generations of trauma that convinced you safety meant staying small. Now you get to remember, you don't have to become worthy of love. You already are. You don't have to prove your right to exist. You already have it. You don't have to overcome your humanity to be successful. Your humanity is your superpower. The path forward isn't about forcing yourself to move. It's about creating enough safety that movement becomes natural. It's about trusting that you don't need to be fixed, you need to be heard. You don't need to be improved, you need to be loved. You don't need to be motivated, you need to be authentic. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. But know this, whatever brought you here, whatever whispered, maybe this will help, that voice is your authentic self, and it's ready to guide you home. The journey back to yourself isn't always comfortable. It's not always fast. It's not always pretty, but it's always worth it. Because on the other side of this integration, on the other side of this healing, on the other side of this sacred selfishness, you'll find something more valuable than motivation. You'll find yourself. And when you find yourself, really find yourself, not the version you think you should be, but the version you actually are, motivation becomes effortless. Not because you'll never feel resistance, but because you'll know how to work with it. Not because you'll always feel ready, but because you'll trust yourself to begin anyway. Not because you'll have all the answers, but because you'll have a most important answer of all. You already are enough. If this video found you in exactly the moment you needed it, maybe that's not a coincidence. Maybe that's your authentic self, finally loud enough to be heard above all the noise of who you think you should be. The world needs what you have to offer, not the perfect, polished, motivated version of you. The real you, the messy, human, beautifully imperfect you. The you who feels deeply and loves fiercely and creates from the overflow of being genuinely yourself. Your motivation will return, but it will return as a gift, not a demand. As love, not fear. As expression, not achievement. As authenticity, not performance. Welcome home.